you are a learning machine, right? Like you're listening to podcasts, you're taking courses, you're reading books, you're watching webinars, you're ingesting all this stuff, but then it just lives in your head. How do I get the stuff out of my head and actually into my team's head so they can be the ones that implement the stuff? And that's really what we do at Growth Institute. It's not just about training the entrepreneur, training the CEO. It's about training the leadership team.
For this episode of Coffee with Closers, I had the privilege of sitting down with Alex Faust. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Growth Institute, which is founded by Vern Harnish, who's the author of Scaling Up and Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. During my conversation with Alex, he shared a practical advice for business leaders and entrepreneurs on some of the things that you need to keep in mind when it comes to scaling your organization. Stay tuned for this conversation. I hope you really enjoy this. Hey, Alex, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Thanks, Samuel. It's great to be here.
Yeah, you and I have been, going back and forth for quite some time, and you just got recently married. Congratulations on that, and baby on the way. There's so much going on in your life, and you still decided to take a little bit of time to talk with me. So very appreciative. So you have this title of Chief, Operating Officer, right, at the Growth Institute. You want to share with us a little bit about your current function there and how you got started and your journey so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started at Growth Institute as an intern back in 2015. I was fresh out of university and needed to start paying back some student loans. So started as an intern. I was like a marketing and support intern, answering emails in a Gmail account. That was our support function at the time. And never thought I would have been here like 8 years later, but it seemed like every time I was ready for a new challenge or needing something else in terms of growth or experience, our CEO, Daniel, kind of saw that and entrusted a new opportunity and new role and new responsibilities upon me. And 8 years later, I've kind of marched my way through the organization in marketing and sales, in operations, to this chief operating officer role. And really, I think to the credit of a lot of what we do at Growth Institute, which we're a training company, and we're like eating our own dog food. I'm learning a lot. I'm surrounded by amazing thought leaders and training tools that help me kind of grow from a dumb 23-year-old into, a COO of a scaling organization. So it's been a fun journey, and very thankful to Daniel for the trust and all the responsibility that he has given me over the years, because it's been an awesome journey.
Yeah, and obviously you've been there, over 8 years now, right? So it's a pretty long journey there at that same company, being very loyal. So what's kind of your why? What gives you the drive to keep striving for success every day?
So it's funny that you asked this, because actually Daniel and I were talking about it yesterday. We're reviewing our core purpose as an organization, and it's to help leaders scale impact and reduce drama. Whether or not that's actually my core purpose, to help entrepreneurs and leaders scale impact and reduce drama, I don't think so. But what has kept me so interested and motivated and dedicated to the role and the organization is all the opportunity that surrounds me. And so I'm always someone who's very curious, wants to kind of be at the top of my game. And I think my why, my goal as a entrepreneur or a leader, is to be that leader that my team loves working for. That when they go somewhere else, or as they go through their career, they keep coming back to like check in, continue those relationships. I want to be like the favorite leader they ever had. And I just hope that the people that work with me feel that, and I can bring the best out of them and allow them to achieve, whatever it is that they're hoping to do inside Growth Institute or externally. And I think that's what Daniel's been able to do for me. He keeps giving me those opportunities to grow and stretch. And I hope I can, reciprocate to the people that are, reporting to me as well.
Yeah. And I think the leaders also find that to be really rewarding, right? When they see people they started as an apprentice, becomes a leader in the organization, and then raising up the next level, generation of leaders, that actually is very rewarding for them as well, right? They're kind of reproducing themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you're kind of reciprocating that. So what do you do? Obviously, you work at an organization that does a lot of training and provides a ton of resources for business leaders across all different industries. what are some of the things that you're doing to develop yourself, other than just actually, going through some of the curriculum that you have in your program?
So that's definitely the first thing. Is I make a point to watch at least one of our courses a week. So we have short courses, long courses, but I'm ingesting at least something of ours every week. I host my own podcast as well called Conversations at the Edge. We host our thought leaders who are inside the platform to come have conversations with our community, and it's kind of twofold. I watch their programs before I interview them. It helps reinforce the concepts and keeps me kind of cutting edge. But I also kind of created a habit of learning other things. So I
Mm-hmm.
spend at least 30, 40 minutes every morning when I get up, walk the dog, spend some time reading a book, reading articles, making sure that, I don't get stuck in my own patterns or my own, with my own blinders on, because there's so much around and so many technologies and industries that are changing really rapidly. It's important for us as scaling leaders to continue to expand our mind and open our eyes to other opportunities.
Yeah, and I think we need to be more of a generalist in that sense, right? You got to know about operations and finance and HR and best practices on technology and security. So you got to know it all, but then you also need to have some core focus where you're sharpened. So obviously, tell our audience a little bit about this Growth Institute, what exactly it is, and what sort of training programs you offer to entrepreneurs and business leaders.
Yeah, so we are focused on helping small, mid-sized companies kind of get through what we call the valley of death. As you scale your organization, it's supposed to get easier, but oftentimes it doesn't, because you add more people, you add more infrastructure, you add more processes, and things get really complicated and break down. The things that worked when you're 5 people don't work when you're 25, and the things that work when you're 25 certainly don't work when you're 225. So Growth Institute has a lot of methodologies. We partner with great thought leaders, Vern Harnish, Victoria Medvec, Liz Wiseman, Marshall Goldsmith, to bring their content online in a format that makes sense for busy executives to learn. And we really focus on the implementation side of things. So it's not just let me watch a YouTube video and figure out this thing, or read a book and understand the concepts. Everything's paired with an implementation plan. So it's about kind of creating this deliberate practice of learning and implementing a little bit each week to enhance the scalability, the efficiencies, the leadership qualities, the sales competencies, so that organizations continue to raise the bar on what's possible for their organization.
I think the key is implementation, because I think, we as entrepreneurs, we know we have to read and learn, but oftentimes we read a ton of information, but we don't necessarily get the opportunity to implement or execute, which is a struggle that I have. I have a lot of head knowledge, which my brother always challenges. He said, if you just go do 1% of the stuff that you already know, man, you'll be so much better. But I think I still so hungry for knowledge, and I always want to listen to a ton of content, podcasts and ebooks and all of those things. But I think execution. So tell us a little bit about how exactly are you helping these educators, right, go and implement the stuff that they're learning. What are some practical ways that you're able to do that?
Yeah, so I think you kind of nailed it. Like, you are a learning machine, right? Like, you're listening to podcasts, you're taking courses, you're reading books, you're watching webinars, you're ingesting all this stuff, but then it just lives in your head. How do I get the stuff out of my head and actually into my team's head so they can be the ones that implement the stuff? And that's really what we do at Growth Institute. It's not just about training the entrepreneur or training the CEO. It's about training the leadership team so that responsibilities are shared. And the way that we train our leaders is through what we call our hybrid method of learning. So there's 4 components to the hybrid method. We take direct learning from the thought leaders. So if you're going to learn Scaling Up by Vern Harnish, it's Vern Harnish teaching you the methodology. You're watching 9 hours of video going through all the tools. And then each week you come to a Zoom call with a Scaling Up coach who's going to kind of help you make sense of it, answer your questions, dig deeper into the tools, and bring it to life for your business. And it's not just you there. You're sharing this space with other leaders, other entrepreneurs from different industries, different parts of the world. Some of our classes have had up to 70 different countries represented in a class. So there's a lot of like cross-pollination of ideas and information that creates a really rich learning environment. Um, and each week you're working on tools. So this is not just about ingesting information. It's about taking what you're learning and putting it down on paper, building the efficiencies, building the processes, building the strategies week by week, so that the time that you're investing in learning is actually time building the business rather than just filling your head with more information that we can't actually get out of our heads. And then finally, the last component is the community and masterminding. So I kind of touched on the cross pollination of ideas, but we break up um, our students into smaller groups as well, so you can have some more intimate conversations around the concepts and really make connections and networking opportunities that can take you beyond just the 3 month or 1 week program that you're going through, and continue to help each other's businesses grow.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned scaling up. I have the book with me. Obviously, this got to be one of the highly recommended book for anybody who's an entrepreneur, right? They got to read it. But like you said, it's not enough to just read, but the implementing. This book is probably one of the most practical book. It has so many practical tools and tips and templates that you can take away and start to apply. But like one of the key things that you said is the entrepreneurs usually have all this information in their head, but they have not figured out how to transfer this over to their leadership team or to their subordinates who's actually in the field doing the work, which is where I think the biggest struggle when it comes to scaling. So define scaling for people, because most people think when they think of scaling is just the revenue growth. Like if I can grow top line, that's scaling, is how they usually perceive that. So how do you guys define scaling, and what are some critical functions of scaling a company?
So at Growth Institute, we typically define scaling as growing 2 times the industry. So it is revenue growth. If your industry is growing at 6%, your goals and strategies should be to grow 12%. If the industry is growing 25%, your goals and strategies should be to be growing 50%. But I really think it depends on the business, the entrepreneur, what the goals are for the business, what you're trying to get out of the company.
Mm-hmm.
I think scaling is increasing the impact that you can have on the community that you serve, doing what you do bigger, better, stronger, more in depth, but not sacrificing your own mental well being. So many entrepreneurs and business leaders are married to the work and they forget about the rest of their life. And I'm not saying work life balance, but work life integration, because many have family and friends, and you don't want the scaling of the business to take over everything else that's going on around you. You got to have, you know, everything in moderation, right? That's what creates the happy, successful life. And I think it's really important that when we think of scale, it's not just in terms of revenue growth or profit margins or cash. It's also about the satisfaction and enjoying the journey. You
Mm-hmm.
have to enjoy what you're doing, because what's the point? Why'd you start your business if you weren't going to enjoy running the business? And I think that can
Mm-hmm.
be such a double-edged sword so often for entrepreneurs and in scaling businesses, because it's hard. It's hard work.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of hours. But when done correctly and done systematically, you can scale and really have a great time doing it as well.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody go into business hoping I would have a miserable life. I think they all start with a good intention of,
Yeah.
hey, this is going to give me freedom and, financial freedom, time freedom, all of those things. But as the company grows, right, the challenge is you're going to be, as the team count grows, the number of accounts grows, all of those things are a level of complexity. And if you don't have the right tool set, like the scaling up framework or something like that, then you're not going to be able to kind of move the company forward. So can you give our audience a little bit of a synopsis of what is the scaling up framework and how can an organization actually apply that?
Yes. And so before we move to the synopsis of scaling up, I think it'll tie together. So in
Mm-hmm.
scaling up, we have our 1-page strategic plan, and that's kind of the core of the scaling up methodology. That's the business strategy that's going to
Mm-hmm.
allow you to scale. And on the side of it, we have the one-page personal plan. And the one-page personal plan is about you, the leader, and you can have everybody in your team fill out a one-page personal plan about what their goals are in life in parallel with your one-page strategic plan. So as you're growing the business, it's not all my focus goes on the strategic plan. I also have my personal plan that needs to scale and grow in unison. So just as you're creating, and I'll explain this in a minute, as you're creating your 3 to 5 year goals, your annual goals, your quarterly priorities for your strategic business, you're creating those 5-year, 1-year, quarterly priorities for your personal life as well to make sure that those two things can scale together and you can really enjoy the ride.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a big distinction between you and Traction or some of the other frameworks works out there, right? Because they're mostly business focused and not necessarily on the leader focused. So I'm curious, when Verne worked with Brian Halligan at HubSpot, I'm sure he probably wrote it and say, hey, in 10 years I want to be chairman and don't want to have anything to do with the day-to-day operation. And if he actually accomplished in a shorter time, I'd love to read it if actually there was something like that written by Brian, because obviously that's a very big success story. Because I think scaling up was introduced to me back in the day by HubSpot when they were actually telling their partners on using a framework like this to actually grow their companies.
Yeah, so I'll give you, I mean, I don't know if Brian used the one-page personal plan. I don't have that information, but it would be cool to know.
Yeah.
But scaling up the framework, I'll give a little bit of a synopsis. It came out of, there's typically 3 barriers to scaling an organization. It's leadership, infrastructure, and marketing capacity. Leadership, you cannot scale a business as a solo person. You need a great team around you. So as the business grows, you have to not only 10x the business, you have to 10x the team. The capacity of the people around you has to be elevated. So it's not your responsibility as the CEO, it's the team's responsibility. And you're confident in the team's ability to bring the business in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Infrastructure, as we mentioned before, as you grow from 5 to 25 to 225, communication breaks down, the systems break down, the technology breaks down, and you got to put in new processes for basically everything. So that can be very challenging. And then the third thing, the marketing effectiveness, you got to make sure that you're talking the right message to the right people, the right time at the right price point. And that can be really challenging to understand where you fit in the market. So those are typically the 3 challenges that organizations have as they scale up. Mm-hmm. Scaling up looks at those challenges and addresses them by looking at people, strategy, execution, and cash. And there are tools and systems that you put into place for people, strategy, execution, and cash to make sure that you address leadership challenges, infrastructure challenges, and marketing effectiveness challenges as you grow the business. So typically when you are digging into scaling up or you're scaling your business, the way in which we believe you can tell whether or not you have a people, strategy, execution, and cash problem is by asking one of these 4 questions. So for people, the question is, would you enthusiastically rehire everyone on the team? For strategy, can you state your strategy simply? And is top line revenue growing? For execution, the question is, are you running your processes drama-free and driving profitability? And then finally, for cash, do you have a consistent source of the cash that's typically generated internally to fund the growth? Mm-hmm. And cash is typically not a sickness. You don't have cash problems. It's actually a symptom of one of the other 3 things. So if you're having people problems, it probably shows up in cash. If you're having strategy problems, it shows up in cash. If you're having execution problems, it shows up in cash. So in the scaling up methodology, we have systems and processes and tools to address those 4 questions and allow you to hopefully, by implementing them, answer yes to the 4 questions around scaling up.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I talk to entrepreneurs too, I usually, or even business leaders, I say sales cures everything, because if you have sales, you actually have the money to solve so many other problems. But I think you also touched on so many of those common commonly overlooked issues because you don't have a good strategy of who you're going after, what you're trying to sell, how you're positioning your company. If you don't have all of those, you're probably not going to be selling your product at the value that it can, it can produce and at the rate that you can charge. And if you don't have the right people, you're always going to be struggling because you're always, micromanaging people because they can't perform at the level. And if you don't have the cash, you have a completely different problem, right? Because it's going to reflect, like you said, it's a lagging measure. Cash is a lagging measure because you're not going to have much in the bank.
Right.
By the time you're trying to solve for the cash, you find out you have a lot of other leading indicators that you overlooked to get to where you are. It's kind of like you're running out of gas, but it's too late already.
Exactly. And you know that you have a people problem when there's a ton of drama in the business. When people are
Yeah.
complaining, there's a lot of turnover. They're calling the CEO 25 times a day, like, how do I do this? Where do I go for this? Can you approve this? You know you have a strategy problem when your top line is not growing. If your revenue is not growing, you probably have a strategy problem. Execution, we're looking at your profit margins and the amount of time that you're spending on the business. If you can do all your stuff in 8 hours a day, that's pretty good. If it's taking you 12, 14 hours a day to execute on your business, you have an execution problem and you got to think about how to make it more efficient. And so, I think that's a good way to tell where to focus first, whether it be people, strategy, execution, and cash. And as you fix those problems, you can look at cash and improve the cash conversion cycles as well to make sure that you're running a healthy business. And
which module really goes into kind of the process and operational efficiency side of it, right? Because it's still a people problem where you have process issues and system issues, because sometimes you can't document everything, but sometimes certain repetitive things you can, right? And there's also things that require some sort of a real world experience that actually give you the knowledge to make decisions or take steps or do things. So what step in the scaling system do you guys actually address that process and systems issues most organizations have?
So it's in the execution side. We use a tool called the Rockefeller Habits Checklist. And so it looks at the different business areas and gives you kind of a systematic way to go through and check off, do we do this well? Do we do this well? Do we do this well? And one of them would be the systems and processes. Do I have written systems and processes for my core functions? And if the answer is no, then we need to look at, okay, what are the core functions where our processes are breaking down? And then it's really about taking one at a time. If you try and fix all your processes at once, you're going to drive yourself crazy and you're going to fix none of them. It's going to be too overwhelming. So you look at your core processes that are driving the business. Typically, it's like 4 to 9 processes that are driving the business forward. You make sure you have a great way to measure them, and you pick one to start improving. And then once you get that one, you can get the next one. And once you get the habit, the hang of using scaling up, you can take on more than one process at a time. But in the beginning, when you're starting out, trying to do more than one, you're setting yourself up to just get frustrated and be no better off than you were prior to trying. So
you guys served trained hundreds and thousands of companies. So I'm just curious, have you seen some of the common, I know there are like those 4 or 5 areas where you have to focus your attention on, like where most companies tend to have no strategy, but they have, they got good people but poor strategy, or they have, good strategy but they have poor performing people. Are they kind of like the 80-20 area, principles where you can, if you fix these 2 things, they tend to see a much greater chance of succeeding in scaling?
I think most people have people problems. People is probably the most painful part of building and scaling an organization, because I think it's the thing you have maybe like the least control over. People are complicated. And so you're never going to please everybody. And I think that can be a challenge. So most people want to look at the people side first with the right people, using the right systems. I think you can probably be successful. Obviously, you need a great product, or can't be selling junk. But unless you can be selling junk, I'm sure there are some businesses out there who sell junk and do really well. I don't know. But I think people is probably where most people end up starting, because that's the biggest pain point for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, and I think that even with great strategy, like you said, if the people aren't good to execute on it, right? And that also comes in the execution side of things too, because at the end of the day, if you're a service company, most of what you do is done by people, right? You
Yeah.
can't really automate it, many of that. So I think, yeah, fixing the people issue, probably one of the biggest struggle. And nowadays it's really hard to find great people because nobody wants to work. That's another problem. So
The right people want to work for your company. I think that's the biggest thing. You have to create an environment that is exciting and is unique and provides an opportunity for the employee that they can't get elsewhere. Just like your product has to be differentiated for your customers, your culture has to be differentiated for your people. I think that's a really important and incredibly difficult thing to get right. But the companies who have great cultures do not have a hard time finding talent. It's
mhm.
it's the organizations that have dull cultures or cultures that don't really have any personality, or there's no reason why would I go here versus here. Like commodity cultures are not going to attract great people. Great cultures attract great people. And so I think that's when people say people don't want to work for crappy companies.
Mhm.
So I think that's how I see it anyway.
Yeah, and especially some of the older, legacy companies, they're just living in the past and don't necessarily have that, the company culture as a priority, and they're not investing into even making it better. So that affects the, willingness of people to wanting to go work for them.
Yeah.
That's for sure. So let's talk a little bit about you. And obviously, you as a business leader now, right, working in this organization, and you have a very fancy title. So execution is probably one of your core strengths. So tell me a little bit about your strategic thinking and how you go about making decisions. Is there some sort of a framework that you follow when it comes to making important decisions?
So I think one of my flaws is I'm like fairly impulsive when
Hmm.
it comes to making decisions. I'm like kind of an off the cuff kind of guy. But I have like a core team of people, trusted advisors that I go talk to. So when I have things that I'm unsure about or feeling less confident about figuring out, I have a core group of people that I tend to go to and ask and get advice, and people not necessarily just inside the company, but outside the organization that can give me different perspectives and help open my mind, because one of the things that I need to work on is that gut reaction, you know? And I know that if I just take some time, talk to my advisors, ask questions, allow different perspectives to come in to the situation, I'm going to see it from a very different perspective and be able to address the strategic issue or opportunity in a more holistic way, in a way that's going to better serve all of our stakeholders, rather than if I were just to make a knee jerk decision on whatever it is, people, strategy, execution, or cash issues.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think I can relate to that as well, because I think when I'm buying something too, like I don't spend way too much time overthinking it, right? Or if you're taking decisions, you feel like if I sit on this, it's going to be not going to happen. So I got to do something, right? And you wait for other people to sometimes chime in, and there's not anybody, and you just got to act and move on. So sometimes it could be good, and sometimes, like I do see indecisive people. It's one of the things that, kind of irritates me sometimes. You see business leaders that it's the right decision for them, for their company. They need the solution, but they sit on it for a long time. That could be very detrimental for them.
And I think,
And you want to challenge them at some times.
of course, and I think it's important to have like the structure in place in a business so people know what decisions they can take and what things they can make mistakes on and where they need to ask for questions. So in job scorecards, like, what do you own? What are your KPIs, priorities, and projects that you own? You make those decisions. If you screw up, that sucks. We'll fix it the next time, or create a process to make sure it doesn't happen the next time. But we don't want to slow you down or micromanage you out of making any key decisions for the business. It's just important that you understand what you're responsible for and your leader understands what those people are responsible for, so that you can have that kind of healthy balance of decision making, asking questions, and not micromanaging along the way.
Yeah, and I think Ritz Carlton has some sort of framework like that. They said, "Hey, you have up to $2,000 for to please a guest. Don't ask any permission for it." And I think same thing. I've listened to Elon Musk talking about how in his company he gives people the ability to just take risks, and they reward people based on the size of the risk they've taken, and they don't punish them, equal to the size of the risk either, right? So if you made a risk, you're not getting penalized, and so people are more likely to do innovative things and try things without the fear of getting fired.
Yeah.
I think that's also a very important leadership skill to have, just giving people the ability to think and do things on their own and take decisions. Because otherwise, you're always going to have to be there to guide them through, or they're waiting on your final say.
Yeah. And I think that, another aspect of the scaling up methodology is on the core values and the importance of core values. And if you don't have core values, you can't give people the freedom to make decisions, because then there's no structure to those decisions. If you have core values, then you can trust that your people are going to make decisions aligned with those core values. Just like in a family setting, there are values that you teach your children, that your parents taught you, and you make decisions in your life that align with those values. You want the same thing in your organization, so that people understand like what's good, what's not good, and the values. And
Mm.
instead of having a rule book of 3,000 things about what you can and cannot do, you have 5 to 7 core values, and you explain what those core values mean, and you share stories about how people are living those core values, and then your organization understands how to also make decisions in alignment with those core values.
Yeah, and that way it makes it real to people, not just something that stays on a plaque on the wall somewhere, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about productivity. Obviously, you have a lot of responsibilities in your personal life and in business. Are there any productivity hacks in terms of how you get things done?
Oh man, so this is not my core strength. I get a lot of stuff done, but I'm not super organized on it.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, this is terrifying, but I work out of my inbox. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, if things need to get done, it's because I've either sent myself an email or someone on my team sent me an email with something I need to do. So, I have like a fairly organized inbox in terms of like, this is the crap that still needs to get done. Not crap, sorry. Anybody who sent me something. Anyway, these are the things that need to get done. If I put it away, I'm probably not getting it done. So I use my inbox like that. I also use Mac Notes. That's where I keep all of my notes. That's where I type things when I'm in meetings. That's when I, create ideas. It's where I'm jotting messaging that I read in a book and thought would be relevant to our product. So I work in basically my inbox and Mac Notes, and the team uses Slack, and that's how I stay organized and make sure I get stuff done. Also my calendar, like I have to
Mm-hmm.
I have to block out time. If I need to write an email that I know is going to take me like 30 minutes of thinking time, if I don't put that 30 minutes in my calendar, it's never happening. So
Mm-hmm.
my calendar is pretty full every day, because in the morning I block out time to get the important things done, to make sure that they do get done. And I tend to do my best work in the morning. So I
Mm-hmm.
get up at 6 a.m. with my dog, take him for a walk, and then from 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock, I have quiet time, because our first meeting's not till 9:07, and I get like the super important things done between 7 and 9, and then I can tend to the organization and the needs of people the rest of the day.
And I know you're kind of like me. You also play a little bit of a sales function as well. So how do you divide the priorities between your sales role of revenue generating activity versus like the operational function of, hey, I got to do these things because it's part of my function as the COO.
So sales comes first. So I'm blocking out time for sales things above and beyond everything else. If I get booked for an important meeting with an important client, the time that I was going to write that email, that gets moved out of the way. I'll find other time for it. But I prioritize my sales tasks and my sales responsibilities first, and then the operational things come after that. The only thing I don't move is my one-on-ones with teammates. Those are kind of sacred times, so I don't move them unless an emergency. And so basically, those are set in stone, set time to do the sales activities, and then fill up the rest of my time with operational efficiencies.
And you mentioned 9:07 for your first meeting. Tell me, why is 9:07 not 9 o'clock or 9:15?
So it's our daily huddle, and most of the team is in Central Time, but I just moved to Philadelphia, so now I'm in Eastern Time. So it's 8:07 for most people, 9:07 for me. And it's 07 because on the first day of the company, when we decided we're going to do the daily huddle, people were late. A lot of people were late. The meeting didn't start till 8:07. And Daniel basically was like, okay, you don't want to start a meeting till 8:07? This is the time. You can show up at 9 if you want to, but the meeting starts at 8:07. And so 8:07 is just like kind of a memorable time. It's very specific, so people know that they have to be there at 8:07. It's not 8:08. It's not 8:06. It's 8:07 that we start the meeting with good news, and that's our daily huddle that we do every day.
That's really cool. I like that. So knowing what you know today, what advice would you give your younger self?
Shut up. That's probably what it would be. I think that as I mature and as I grow up, I realize that I need to talk less, listen more, and trust people. Trust that other people have the answers. It doesn't always have to be me. So I think that's the biggest thing, and something I'm still working on. But that's the number one.
Awesome. Well, Alex, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with our audience.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Samuel. It's been a pleasure. And if anybody's interested in learning more about scaling up, Growth Institute's a great place to go.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.